like to thank everybody online for participating today. We're excited to have you all in this online conference and excited to discuss general planning and community buy-in today. And I'd like to give a special thank you to all of our panelists for taking time out of your Friday to be here with us. And yeah, we can go ahead and get started. First up, we have Beth Holbrook, who is now a commissioner on the UTA Board of Trustees, or board member, sorry, I don't know if what the correct title is. But Beth has a wealth of experience in both local government planning and community building, and now in public transit. And so we're excited to have her today.
Thank you, Carson, and good morning, everyone. I'm just going to introduce who my fellow panelists are, and they're going to tell you more about themselves when they come up into this presentation. Thank you again. I'm Beth Holbrook with Utah Transit Authority, and I also have joining me this morning Ari Bruning with Envision Utah, Ryan Beck with Envision Utah, Megan Waters with UTA, and Michaela Jordan with the Greater Salt Lake Municipal Services District. So I wanted to welcome everyone here today, and please remember to ask any questions on the chat or in any other format that you find would be working for you. We're going to talk today about your city vision and plan, and does it have buy-in with your community? Here's who we are. Sorry about that. I'm new at this screen sharing methodology and I forgot to press the button. My apologies. Purpose and need. Wasatch Choice 2050. Earlier this year, the partners came together to work under the Wasatch Choice 2050 vision plan, and the understanding that significant growth is still coming to our region. These partners, all of us, want to emphasize that communities along the Wasatch Front have a plan, and we have a plan to prepare for the growth, and in order to maintain and enhance our quality of life, we want to make sure that we're all talking the same language. This vision can and should be used as a guidepost as we collectively consider and evaluate the potential long-term impacts associated with COVID-19 outbreak, and to jointly and effectively craft solutions to those challenges. Our public engagement group, I think I got ahead of myself. Our public engagement work group, the Wasatch Choice Vision, was created with community input and buy-in prior to the pandemic and represents a shared vision for our future. To foster this community-driven approach, we formed a public engagement working group of Wasatch Choice partners to help elevate public engagement now and moving forward as we engage residents in growth-related conversations and build community support for key decisions. One of the reasons that I'm involved in this, and I'm a co-chair with Ari Bruning on this, because I am super passionate about making sure that we are planning. And that's why I'm here today, and that's why we wanted to have these discussions. The direction of the group, or the purpose and need of a guidebook. We have two objectives that were identified by the Wasatch Choice public engagement partners to support community conversations and provide tools and strategies necessary to promote effective public input. The first was to compile best practices for public input and outreach, and the second was to create a process guidebook for effective public engagement. The two objectives ultimately merged into one guidebook of strategies and best practices. We're here today to describe the priorities identified for this tool, as well as our progress and next steps. We'd love any feedback that you might have for us with this tool, because this is meant for your benefit. Effective public processes. The Public Engagement Working Group identified overarching goals of an effective public process that we felt distilled what we aim to accomplish when we engage the community. These goals include: create plans and policies that benefit from broad support. The work we do impacts the lives of the residents in our communities, so developing approaches that are compatible with the community and have broad support is a very important goal. Gather representative input, including historically underrepresented communities. We should be striving always to hear from more and diverse community members to ensure the plans and policies we move forward work for our whole community and not just a few. Accomplish hard conversations that improve the community. In public processes, we should be addressing issues directly and having those difficult conversations with open-mindedness and willingness to listen and discuss the challenges that face our communities. Utilize robust, constructive, and informed conversation. By engaging in conversations like these, we can improve shared respect and civility with the community and make the residents in our communities feel heard. Some of the challenges. Part of understanding how to conduct the most effective public processes is identifying the challenges that exist and strategizing with them in mind. We want to reflect this in the guidebook. We see it often. Plans are made, ignored, or bypassed, and the public input tends to not be representative of the community as a whole. There's a few common challenges that we are all probably familiar with today that include focusing more on urgent issues of the moment rather than longer-term issues, low participation unless people have an immediate direct stake in the outcome, not considering regional impacts in local decision-making. Public processes can be expensive, so cost can be a factor. High levels of controversy around accommodating growth issues. I think we've all been there. Negative messages can be contagious, and traditional public hearing formats may lend themselves to magnify only those few really strong voices. The principles for public engagement. We combined our expertise as well as existing resources to put forth 7 principles for effective public engagement. We'll go over each of those individually in the next couple of slides. Trust and authenticity. This principle highlights the important role mutual trust and authenticity play in engaging meaningful and informative conversation with the community. Remember that the community members and participants in public processes are the experts on their community, and how they are impacted by the decisions we make has value in our discussions. Public engagement processes should not be implemented simply to check a box, to just get it complete. The public should have a role in driving outcomes that impact them. In order to do that, they do need the education. Being a neutral facilitator will allow for an authentic, honest process. Conversely, advocating one way or another may alienate participants and allow our processes to be diminished by those who do not agree. Honest processes do not include predefined solutions. Develop solutions to community challenges with stakeholders and community members. They will help you get that message out if you can communicate with them effectively. Provide for equitable and inclusive participation of all participants, regardless of background, educational level, or any other factors. Locally tailored processes and solutions. We all know that one size does not fit all. What works in one place may not work in another, so tailoring processes to match our community needs. I'll just give you a quick example. I live in Bountiful, and Bountiful is a built-out community in its entirety and doesn't have some of those challenges that cities that have yet to be fully built out do. So creating an environment where the fine-tuning of that particular community will have a lot of value, helping your residents to understand some of the factors regarding growth in the future. Locally tailored processes and solutions. Collaboration and partnerships. I went ahead of myself and then back. Convene and partner with stakeholders from a broad cross-section of the community. Stakeholders play many valuable roles in a public process and are critical to the success. And we're going to be touching more on stakeholder engagement later in the presentation when you hear from Envision Utah and our other 2 collaborators from UTA and Salt Lake City. Transparency. Transparency seems like it's a given. We all understand it. It helps, though, with our public to understand how valuable it is that we engage them and that we hear them. And that creates this level of trust so that when our transparency goes out, people believe what it is that we are putting out there. Make findings and input publicly available to the community. Demonstrate how input from the community informs products, decisions, plans, and policies. Broad participation. We may tend to gravitate towards working with and hearing from the same people over and over because they do show up often. But it will serve us even better to expand participation, to include more and different voices and perspectives. Our public processes should aim to achieve inclusive and representative participation from all within our communities. We also should be striving to engage the public broadly throughout various phases of a project and not just a one-time involvement. I learned that being on a council that had discussions of contentious issues, there sometimes is such a challenge to keep getting the information out there, but that I think is one of the key things that helps to continue to develop transparency and broad participation. Open-mindedness. Like trust, open-mindedness goes both ways. Be neutral and open to what happens during the public processes. As a facilitator, respect and incorporate public comments regardless of your personal opinion or experiences. It's not easy, believe me, I know, but it's really important to facilitate honest and authentic processes. We have to be able to continue communicating. Trusted information. Engage with your colleagues in conversations about trusted information. And trusted information, we sometimes give ourselves a narrow scope of valid information, but consider as a team what other information is valid for the public process. You might consider more qualitative sources like stories from the community that has a valuable point, or you might just also incorporate additional quantitative data. Both of those together can really help to create a strong story. Consider whose information is valid. Are there groups whose voices and perspectives are valued less or more within your communities? And where is valid information found? What sources are you currently limiting to, and could you expand that? Have these conversations ahead of time before you get out into the public space so that you can define the best approach for your purposes and make sure that they're covering as many areas as possible to maximize access to this public engagement process. I'm now going to turn the time over to Ari Bruning, and he is going to continue from here, and I wanted to thank you for this opportunity.
Thanks, Beth. I'm Ari Bruning. I'm the CEO of Envision Utah, and let's see if I can get control here of this screen. Here we go. And I'm going to talk to you for a little bit about the process for engaging people in doing a long-range plan or vision for your city. So thinking about when you're doing your general planning. It's critical to do that general planning well and have a robust conversation about growth issues at that level. Because, you know, Beth talked about some of the challenges of a lot of our planning issues that happen where people are focused on the issues of the moment, the controversial project that's coming forward, not thinking about regional impacts and so on. And when you're talking about long-range visioning, at that stage is when you can actually have those conversations when you're thinking about the regional impacts, you're looking long-term. And the better and more robust engagement you get, the more buy-in you're going to have to that plan so that when that controversial issue comes forward, you can stick to your plan. So that's the goal. And historically, when we plan, what we tend to do is we go do some analysis and research, decide what we want to do, we go educate the public about it, announce the plan, and then we defend the plan. And what happens is the plan sits on a shelf and gets ignored. And what we in Envision Utah pioneered, I say we, I wasn't involved, but in the late 90s was a different approach to this long-range planning and visioning, where we actually engage the public more and get more buy-in. And what that process involves is we pay attention to what Utahns value. So the people you're planning with, what do they really want? And I'll talk a little more about each of these. We engage the stakeholders in the process. We do scenarios. We look out to whatever our planning horizon is, 2040, 2050. We look at different ways that things could turn out. And we get public input on those scenarios to understand what direction people want to go. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each of those steps of the process and summarize. There are your 5: values, stakeholders, scenarios, public input, and that leads to the vision. So first, talking about values. So we have used research companies to do this value laddering technique with people. And what they do is they'll interview people, and at the bottom of this ladder is the attribute that they care about. So they may say, you know, what is it that you like most about living in your community, or what do you like least? And you may hear something like, I don't like the traffic. Drives me crazy. And then the next level up, they ask them about the benefits of that. What are the consequences? What does that mean for you? Why don't you like the traffic? And they could say, that means that it takes me longer to get where I want to go. And then you go to the next level up and you start to get into emotions and you say, well, what would you do if you had more time? Well, I'd spend it with my family. And then you get up to the actual value that they're fulfilling with that. And it might be that they feel a sense of peace of mind when they're spending the time they feel like they ought to with their family. And this is a very powerful technique, because what it does is it gets you beyond the attributes that people may fight about. They may think about, the attribute of their community may be a high density apartment complex or something, and they're fighting about that. But when you get above that level and you're thinking about what they're really trying to achieve in their lives, people tend to agree. And it's much more emotionally impactful. So if you're communicating at the benefits and emotions level, you're going to have a lot more success as you talk to people. So this is the #1 values ladder that we've seen every time we've done this technique with Utahns. Strongest value. What people really like about Utah is the people. They're surrounded by good people who share their values. It's a close-knit place. You go up the ladder and you see, that means it's a great place to raise children, or it's a great place to spend time with family and friends. That makes them feel safe and have a sense of community, and ultimately gives them a sense of peace of mind. Now, when you think about this, and you think about some of the zoning hearings you may have been part of, you can see this ladder being actuated. People say, I don't want that development to happen here, for example. And maybe what's going on is they're not sure that the people who live in it are going to share their values and be good people, and they're not going to feel safe. So thinking about these kind of values is important for choosing the issues you deal with, for thinking about how to talk about them, and so on. And so you can find our value studies that we've done at envisionutah.org, or you can do your own interviewing with residents and find out what it is that they want, and not just the immediate what do they want, but why do they want it, and then think about how to communicate about that. So we always start with values, and then we engage stakeholders. So think about the people in your community who are respected. Think about the people who may represent communities or voices that aren't normally heard. Think about those whose buy-in you're going to need in order for the plan to actually happen. And think about people who love your community. And we put together actual formal stakeholder groups when we do our visioning processes. And these are people who can help us get the word out, for example. They tend to have their own networks, and they can help get stronger public involvement. They bring trust to the process, and so on. And think about business leaders, chambers, think about developers, those who own land, education, media, everybody. Go through the list and make a list of those who you really want involved in your process. And then as you do this, we always plan around scenarios. And you think about, if we do X, then what will happen? The result is going to be Y. And so some of the choices you might make involve, where you might put density in your community, or what kinds of transportation improvements you might make. And we will design those into scenarios. We'll do the transportation modeling and model other outcomes that people care about, and bring that back to them and say, okay, here are some choices and their results. Which direction do you want to go? It's kind of a way to examine a virtual future. It's kind of a crash test dummy, if you will. And we always compare alternative future states. We don't compare the future to today. A lot of what people want is for things to stay the same. We're in a growing state. It's not going to stay the same. And so you have to compare alternative futures, realistic options. And so here's an example. We did Wasatch Front-wide scenarios with different ways we could grow. We varied housing mix and whether we have mixed-use centers and where the growth goes and different transportation modes and so on. And then we'll model those. And then I think this example is from our Utah County visioning process. We'll tell them what some of the outcomes are, like how long is it going to take you to drive different places? How much ag land are we going to lose? How much water are we going to use? Those kinds of things. And then ask people, okay, given those choices and their outcomes, what is it that you want? So they're making educated decisions. And we'll make sure that we get robust input, both before we do the scenarios, so we're looking at the right things, and then also in evaluating the scenarios. In the past, we've done a lot of in-person events, open houses and workshops and things, where people do mapping exercises. We haven't been able to do that lately, which actually has been kind of good, because we've been able to test a lot of online techniques. That last one that's listed here, that iTracks, we tried this discussion board where each person committed to participate for 20 minutes a day for 3 days. They could do it whenever they wanted throughout the day, and they'd get online and they'd type answers to open-ended questions, and then we could look at their answers and the next day decide what we wanted to dive in deeper on, and so on. We felt like we got great input from that, more than we would in an in-person event where people talk one at a time. So I think the easier you make it for people, the more participation you're going to get, and you want to get good, in-depth, educated responses. So think carefully about that. And then we take all that input about what people want from the scenarios and so on, and we combine that into a vision. And if you've done your work well and engaged a lot of people and had that robust conversation, then that vision has some staying power, where people feel comfortable implementing that vision, and we don't just throw it out the window when the next development project comes in. So that's the goal. And just to summarize, you start with values, you engage a large group of stakeholders and champions, you use scenarios to help people evaluate the choices, and make sure you have a lot of people involved throughout who are representative of your community. And now I'm gonna turn it to Ryan Beck, who's our Vice President of Planning, and he's gonna walk us through an example that we just did of how to do this. Ryan?
All right, thanks, Ari. All right. So, I'm trying to get control of my slides here.
You should have it.
Okay. Oh. Let's see. Okay, I finally got it. All right, thank you, Megan. All right, as Ari mentioned, my name is Ryan Beck. I am Vice President of Planning with Envision Utah. I want to talk a bit about valley visioning, which is, I just want to use as an example of the process that Ari just talked about, some of the principles that Beth talked about. Just want to go through this. So this was a project that we were asked to do by the Association of Utah County Chambers. And of course, we had a couple other partners that I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, both being UVU and BYU. So what we were doing is looking at Utah County time horizon 2050, a countywide project. Everyone knows that if you've been to Utah County, that they are in the crosshairs of growth in Utah. They are growing quickly. Transportation, land use concerns, just about every city's dealing with it down there. So we wanted to go ahead and do a 2050 vision for them. So Ari mentioned steering committee. Well, this was our Valley Vision steering committee, and the steering committee was actually, it didn't even fit on one slide, so I just put one slide on, but you can see there's a mix of elected officials, private businesses, citizens, anyone who would be interested in the outcomes, and also people who would be champions and would help implement such a vision when it was completed. So we put together the steering committee in phase one. They worked throughout the whole process, but so Ari mentioned the process that we went to. We went through maybe a little bit simpler process with this one, but phase one was all about listening. I'm going to get into that a little bit more. Phase two, as Ari mentioned, scenarios. We tested scenarios. We figured out the impacts and the benefits of the scenarios, and we had this public weigh in on those scenarios. And then phase three is we took the most supported elements and we put them together in a vision so that the communities and the county and all of the affected parties had a target to shoot for in the form of a vision. So let me just talk a little bit more about phase one, the listening phase. And really the goal is to understand the full range of people's ideas, their concerns for the future, just get a really good idea of how they, what they want to maintain, what they don't want to lose, things like that. So the tools we used in that, online survey, I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. We did mapping exercises in person. We did live polling in person at public workshops. There we go. So we did 12 workshops around the valley, around Utah County. We had 400 people show up to those workshops, and they produced 75 or so maps that I will show you in a moment. We had about 27, and this is just phase one, about 2,700 people weigh in on an online survey just to get a range of issues that we could solve. So this was one of the survey questions, and basically the question is, in light of new growth, how important how do we prioritize the following outcomes for Utah County's future? And you can see things came to the top of the list, just like you would think. Manage water, improve transportation, reduce air pollution, improve our education for our kids so they can get jobs in the future, create good jobs. Concerns about housing affordability came up. You know, agriculture, preserving our agriculture and open space came up. So what we did with this, we felt like we had marching orders from this list, and we went ahead and we put together experts, priority working groups full of experts that were experts in the field to help us research and figure out scenarios for all those issues. I mentioned mapping exercises at the public workshops. You can see in the pictures here that we asked people to draw transportation improvements, both road and public and active transportation improvements. You know, we gave them a population target, and we said these people are going to have to work somewhere and they're going to have to live somewhere. So we gave them land use chips, and we said, tell us how Utah County grows, how and where. Phase two is all about the scenarios. So we're trying to, I mentioned those priority working groups. We put together working groups on housing, education and workforce, air quality, transportation, agriculture and open space, and water quality and quantity to really test those with the public. On this phase, we got 11,000 people to weigh in online, and again, another round of workshops to have people weigh in. I'm just going to show you one of those. We asked many questions on that survey, and we modeled things like transportation and air quality, and but I'm just going to talk to one result just so you get an idea of some of the graphics we showed, and just to give you a little bit of an idea. So scenario A was all about current conditions, and we projected growth as it's happened for the last 20 years. So we projected the last 20, you know, think land use, think lot size, think mix, and so we projected that to 2050. Scenario B was all about organized centers, just like, you know, very similar to what you see in the Wasatch Choice for 2050 vision. Growth occurs in mixed-use centers where we've made the investments in transportation. Scenario C was about westward growth. There's a lot of available land to build on out in Cedar Valley. Think Saratoga Springs, Cedar Valley. Lots of available land out there. So we had a lot of those maps identify growth out there. So we needed to test that. And then scenario D was about southern growth, where also a place, you know, south of Provo, where there's lots of available land. We placed that a majority of that growth between Provo and Santaquin. And then scenario E, also from the maps, we heard this idea about why don't we accommodate growth primarily in the existing areas where there's existing infrastructure. Let's make use of that. So we tested those, we modeled them for all of the impacts that Ari mentioned before. And let me just show you what some of the graphics we showed to our stakeholders and the public. So this map on the right, that's Utah Lake right in the middle. In the pale yellow growth is existing development. And the new development is in yellow. So this is scenario A, past trends, the last 20 years projected forward. But what it really did was gave people an idea. It really was eye-opening to say, hey, if we grow this way, these are the results. So this was scenario A, past trends. Just watch this urban footprint change as I scroll through these scenarios. So this is scenario B. This was a centers-based scenario. Look how much less land we consume, and start thinking about the impacts that might have about how much we pay in taxes, how many miles of road do we have to maintain, how many miles of sewer do we have to maintain. So that was B. This is C. This is westward growth. Notice Not a lot of development going on south of Provo here, but quite a bit of growth going on out here in Eagle Mountain. And then scenario D, we flipped conversely, lots of growth going on down here. South of Provo, not as much going on in Eagle Mountain. Now, think about what impacts this might have. If you are a supporter of local agriculture, think about the negative impacts that might have to our agriculture if we build homes there. So just, scenarios to help people really identify, look at these long-range decisions. The decisions we make today have long-term consequences. So, and this is scenario E, urban infill. So just some interesting graphics to help people make an educated decision. These were their results. And there's a couple of things going on here. So their results were they supported a center style. That's good for 2050, for our Wasatch Choice 2050, very much in line with that. Also a lot of support for growing west into Eagle Mountain, and then a lot of support for scenario E, which was the urban infill scenario. So anytime you do a survey, you always get questioned on your survey technique. So what we did in the orange here is we went ahead and hired to have a random sample survey done to verify our results. And that's what you can see in the orange. For the most part, they aligned very well. Always happy about that. So once we get the public to weigh in on these scenarios, we take the most supported elements and we put them into a vision. Again, a target that policymakers, that people at cities, city planners, that they can have a target to shoot towards. This is the example. This is the draft. We're not quite done, but the Utah Valley vision for 2050. And these, for them, we'll have very high kind of goals and strategies on a couple of different levels. We'll have a vision statement, which is pretty lofty and pretty aspirational. And then we'll follow that up with goals and strategies that get pretty specific on how to implement these vision principles. But with that, I think that was my last slide. I am going to hand off to Megan.
Thanks, Ryan. Really good examples of public engagement processes at work. So Michaela and I are going to take it home and wrap up to kind of synthesize some of the best practices that we've come up with for this guidebook to help really shape effective public input and public engagement work in our state. So the first idea here with increasing engagement is providing ample opportunity for the public to engage and really making it easy to participate. So we want people to engage with our public processes. It is not a win when nobody shows up. So we need to provide many avenues for people to engage and make it easy and maximize their ability to participate. So some of the key things we've identified under this idea is repetition and diverse choices. We want to, again, as Beth mentioned in the beginning with the key principles, one size does not fit all. And so we need to make multiple methods available to the community to really meet different needs, different people's schedules, comfort levels with engagement, and providing a variety of methods such as a mix of in-person and online. In-person isn't as popular right now, but we will get there again, but really providing diverse options and flexible participation so people can participate on their own time. When we talk about accessibility, we want to make an effort to ensure that access barriers are being addressed, being eliminated as much as possible. And I think under accessibility, there's a variety of considerations. So we need to think about ADA accessibility for in-person events, for online events, as well as language access. Are we providing materials in language for members of our community to meaningfully and effectively participate? And then thinking about other access things like childcare, transportation. Can people get to our engagement opportunities? Beyond those accessibility considerations, I think there's another accessibility consideration in making information easily accessible to people so that they can jump in anytime and kind of jump in on the engagement, that they know what's happening with the project and have an opportunity at any point throughout the process to weigh in. Going to people really means that we're not always asking people to come to us. Many spaces can be intimidating for people, unfamiliar to them, and therefore really can impact willingness to engage. Sometimes it's harder for people to get to places outside of their own community or neighborhood for multiple reasons. So when we go to them, when we find places that are familiar to them, comfortable to them, convenient for them, that can really increase our success and engagement. We should use neutral and inclusive locations. Brevity. We all know our own attention spans are limited. And so I think we really need to keep this in mind when we're planning engagement, keeping it short, thinking about bullet points, high level information that's easy to digest, that doesn't take a lot of time for people, because time is such a precious commodity for our community. And so we need to keep that in mind and honor the time we're asking people to contribute. And finally, just on this slide, thinking about both qualitative and quantitative information, again, just to reiterate this, there may be some methods that are easier for people than others. And so if it's easier for them to kind of tell you a story, is that something you're able to capture? We should be thinking about both of these formats so that we can gather a breadth and depth of information from our communities. So Michaela is going to share an example from Copperton. I'm going to let her go.
Hi everyone, I'll introduce myself real quick. I'm Michaela Jordan. I'm a long-range planner with the Greater Salt Lake Municipal Services District. So for the past year or so, Copperton has been working on their general plan. As part of that planning process, I created a survey. And the first part of the survey is a traditional planning survey. It uses multiple choice questions, rank order questions, and a Likert scale to ask residents about their specific priorities, needs, wants, etc. In the latter half of the survey, however, I used open-ended questions, which can be a lot more difficult to analyze and provide less clear information on the one hand. For example, in one phrase or sentence, summarize what you love most about Copperton. And the reason I asked this question is because I wanted to be able to capture resident voices. And so when I created the planning document with the town, that they could read the document later on and actually feel that they had ownership over it, because they could read direct quotes from themselves and from their neighbors and see that right there in the document. And so this is an example of kind of the importance and the purpose of using both qualitative and quantitative input from communities. This example focuses more on inclusivity and the importance of inclusivity in public engagement. So Megan mentioned the importance of diverse choices, and this example goes hand in hand with that. So there was a community that had a proposal for redevelopment of a town center. So we wanted to understand what business owners in that town center thought about that and about economic opportunities in their community in general. So first we sent an email to the business owners with a survey included, and we asked them for their thoughts, and we got 0 responses. So then we sent a mailer to every business owner, and we had a link to the survey, and all of this we included in both Spanish and English, and we got 1 response from there. So then we went door to door to every single business in the town center, and we brought paper copies of the surveys so they could take it right then and there if they wanted to. Plus we brought flyers with the links to the survey online if it was more convenient for them to take it at another time. And from this process, our response rate jumped to, I think, about 16%, which is pretty great. And this goes to show that one, people may not respond to one method, but that doesn't mean they're not interested. It means that that's not the method that works for them. 2, it showed that, if we had simply gone to the council meeting and said, please give us your input about the town center, we would have heard from the same voices over and over again, and none of those voices would have been the voices of these local business owners, because these local business owners were not attending any of the formal meetings in the community. And so it really took us trying different methods and reaching out in person to have inclusivity in this process. This goes hand in hand in general with getting the word out. There are so many different methods available to us now in order to inform the public of what's going on and to welcome feedback and input from the public into our processes. Different options range from social media posts to mailers to paid advertising. And it's important to note that what works for one community might not be the best method for another community. I like to think of this as a grab bag and try to use at least a couple of these methods for every single public engagement event. So that way we're reaching the broadest scope possible for each event. For example, when I was a graduate student, we worked on a plan for Stockton, Utah, and the mayor let us know that residents were really involved in the community Facebook page. So we made sure that all of the planning information that we shared and input we collected was also posted on Facebook. For White City, they really like mailers. So for every survey that we have, we send a mailer to every single household in White City to let them know that that survey is up and available and that we would love their feedback on it.
And yeah, so communicate often. And I'm going to move into some engagement strategies now. So this list is not exhaustive, but I think what we want to achieve here is really thinking that there are a lot of specific strategies we can implement, but there are also many factors to consider along with those. Different methods of engagement require a variable amount of time, effort, money. Those are all really important things to consider, especially within the context of our team's capacity. So choose wisely, and different methods of engagement also attract different audiences. So using multiple methods is a great idea to capture a diverse cross-section of our community, since we know some methods work for some communities and others don't. Different methods also require us to facilitate in different ways. And so being prepared to facilitate effectively and kind of adapt to the different method is important. I think we talk about how to engage participants with some of these methods really meaningfully so that they can help solve problems with us and not just vote yes or no. And I think Ari and Ryan shared a really great example of that, of making decisions together and working through solutions together. I want to just make a plug at the end of this list here. If there are approaches that aren't working, kind of like Michaela was talking about, try something new. If you're not getting the results you wanted, the input that you expected, there's room for creativity and innovation in community engagement. So try new things to reach the audiences you need to. We also want to strive to make issues and engagement relatable to the community. So framing issues in ways that are relevant and really resonate with what the community cares about. Ari talked a lot about values. We want to make sure that our issues that we're talking about issues in ways that are important to people. We also have a responsibility in engagement to educate and inform. So we want people to have all the resources and tools that they need so that they can effectively provide feedback. So good visualizations are part of this. Really robust communication is important too. We want to use approachable and plain language. A lot of us know this, but I think sometimes forget when we get stuck in acronyms or technical jargon. This isn't an approachable way to engage. And so it's important that we review our materials over and over to make sure we're using approachable and plain language that resonates with communities so that they feel empowered and driven to engage with us.
This goes hand in hand with moderating and facilitating. How we moderate an engagement event really sets the tone for all those present. If I show up really irritable and closed-minded, I'm probably going to receive less than open-minded responses back from the public. Likewise, if I show up patronizing or that I already have a solution in mind, then I'm probably not going to get that open-minded, really creative feedback and genuine input from the public that I really want to hear. So in the guidebook, some tools and strategies that we came up with for moderating and facilitating effectively include these listed below. It's always great to start off with ground rules and to make these as part of the working group or committee, because then the group has ownership over it. This also eliminates the factor where you as the leader or the staff member is the bad person who's always calling out bad behavior in the group, and it takes out that subjective factor. So people don't think, oh, you like their idea, so you're calling out them for interrupting, but you don't like my idea, so and vice versa. So that kind of gives the group ownership over the space, and it helps the space be more respectful. Another great tool is having a parking lot of ideas. So if someone brings up a great idea, but it's not part of the agenda, and there's not really time to give it adequate discussion at that meeting, you can say, great, thank you so much for sharing that idea. I think it's really important. Let's add that to our parking lot, and we'll make sure to schedule a time at our next meeting, so that way we can really discuss it well, and that helps keep the meeting on track. How we as the moderator, how our tone is really influences the meeting. So how we speak influences what we hear. If we're open-minded, we'll get more open-minded responses back. And if we're managing conflict well, then people will be more likely to come back to the group because they sense that it's a good space for discussion. But if we're not managing the conflict, then it might get, tense and irritable, and people don't want to be in spaces that are like that consistently. So you might see lower participation rates moving onward if you're not managing conflict well. Part of the skills and strategies for that are using reframing and reflecting. So for example, if someone says commercial properties always bring crime, as moderator, you can say, oh, I hear that you're really concerned about safety in your neighborhood. Am I hearing you correctly? And so that reframe and then reflecting kind of gets back at that interest or value that Ari and Ryan were talking about earlier, and takes it away from the positional statement.
And finally, we want to talk about follow through and engagement. Our engagement needs to come full circle. When the comment period is over, we shouldn't be done with engagement. We want to make sure that when people take time to share their perspectives and thoughts with us, and really put forth that effort, that we're giving them something back. So we need to share the feedback that was received, the survey results or the comments, whatever that is, and share how the feedback was used, if possible. Sharing which feedback was used and which feedback maybe wasn't incorporated and why can go a long way in building trust. You maybe hear a lot, like people may be sort of unwilling to participate, or they feel like the process doesn't work because they're like, well, you're not going to read my comments anyway, or it's not going to make a difference. And so when we put more effort into kind of building this feedback loop with people, we can cultivate trust with the community. We can build that back and forth with them and really encourage future participation. So if people feel like their time is valuable, that we're hearing them and listening to them and it's making a difference, they'll be more likely to engage with us in the future. So this is just something to think through with the engagement process. So we want to share just a couple of resources. Again, this is all of the content you've heard today is really based on this guidebook that our work group is putting together. So some of the important resources we've used to inform the guidebook include, of course, Envision Utah's Regional Visioning Guidebook. We also took the lead from Utah Division of Multicultural Affairs, Building Equity and Inclusion Through the Power of Language. This is a great resource, and they have a lot of great staff that can help with building equity and how we work with communities. Just menu of interactive engagement activities, as well as dealing with difficult people and conflict management, those important skills for effective public engagement, as well as more generally the International Association for Public Participation is a great resource for improving public engagement processes. So our next steps, really quick, we do have the guidebook I mentioned multiple times, but we really want this to work for you. So if you have feedback on it from today, if you felt like something was missing or something missed the mark completely, we want to hear back from you, because this should be something that works really well and is useful. So once we have gone through several rounds of review and vetting of the guidebook, we want to publish and share the guidebook with all of you and partners widely across the Wasatch Front and the state. So if you do have any feedback for us or want to get in touch about anything, we have our contact information here, and I believe there's quite a bit of time left actually for questions. So Carson, do we have any questions from the audience?
I'm not seeing any right now. If anybody has questions, please feel free to type them in the chat box. I'm sure our panelists would love to answer some questions.
Well, people are doing that. I just kind of wanted to share something because you may be curious as to why UTA is kind of involved in some of this discussion. Yes, we are the transit agency, and of course we want to be engaged in any public growth discussions, but there's also something that I think really lends additional value, and that is there is a lot of challenge in having these dialogues when you're talking with people about transit. They might have an opinion about transit, or they might not understand how the thought of connectivity and what that brings. And so we have been working really hard to really incorporate a lot of these public engagement values that can really help us as an agency to get that additional input and the ability to actually do a better job of communicating outward and working on our education pieces. When I was with Bountiful City, one of the things that has stuck with me for quite some time is there were not many contentious issues in Bountiful City, but I did have one that stuck with me, and that was a discussion on some infrastructure investment. And it was a public open house, and I remember distinctly having residents stand and talk to me and tell me how unhappy that they were, and that they did not like what it is that they thought that I was doing, and how they were like saying, you're not listening, and I don't understand why you're telling me this. I never saw this before. And it's this real classic communication conundrum, right? Where you as a person or as an organization think you've done all this great education, but it's not coming back. And that's one of the things that I really feel so strongly about, that we can all work together towards as organizations, as cities, as counties, as a state, and of course our MPOs and everyone else. When we talk about growth, we have to keep the dialogue going, and we have to keep the education going. So that's my little spiel for why I feel so strongly about this. And I welcome any experiences anyone else had. I'd love to hear about them, because I think we can all learn from these types of things. And I know I learned a lot from this particularly contentious and challenging conversation that I had with residents about a particular topic. So with that, I invite anybody to share any information that they had as well.
While we're waiting for folks to ask questions, I did have one question come to mind, and that was, you've all provided some good examples of how to approach situations constructively and try to build a positive dialogue. But I was wondering, there are some situations where the planning discussion may be around a decision that's already been made elsewhere, whether it's at the state level or whether it was made in the past. And I've noticed sometimes residents are very stuck on that one piece of the discussion. Do you have any suggestions for how to maybe move past that and discuss how to either mitigate the consequences of that or diffuse the situation and have a productive dialogue when people are already fired up about the decision that's out of your hands?
I would say, Carson, to your question, that always value, a lot of times people don't understand that the decision was, a previous decision is driving the decisions that are going on today. So there's always value in backing up a little bit and saying, because of these decisions, we're here now, and that doesn't take care of all of the anger and all of the people, but you would be surprised at that. A little bit of education goes a long ways in helping people understand where we're at and today and what we're trying to solve today.
One thing I might add is sometimes people just want to be heard. So, you may not be able to do anything about that previous decision, but listening and commiserating and making them feel heard can go a long way, rather than just dismissing pretty quickly what they said because you can't do anything about it.
I think being upfront about when decisions are not changeable, like going into that being like, this is something that was made, but also identifying ways that the public can, make change or influence other decisions that may be related or downstream from that one factor.
Thank you for that. It does look like we've had a couple comments written. First, Janelle Seeley said, from a previous workshop, my biggest takeaway was to close the loop and give feedback to residents on how you have incorporated their input into the decision-making process. And then Melinda Lee, I think I can't entirely see your last name, so apologize if I got that wrong. It says, thank you for all of this. I'm excited to see and use this guidebook. I want to share this presentation with our City Council and Planning Commission members. Does anybody have any feedback on those 2 points?
Carson, I love that comment. I love both of them, but the one talking about the City Council and Planning Commission members, I really feel that having this opportunity to also engage those Planning Commission members, I think is really valuable. And they are also an intrinsic part of the communities that they serve, and they have an extra connectivity piece to the residents within that community. And so for them to be able to get access to this continuing understanding in this guidebook that we'll share shortly, this will be really beneficial. I think that we know how challenging it is with some of these cities to have a lot of this dialogue, especially about growth. And so we want to be as proactive as possible. So thank you for that.
I'm also, I appreciate the comment about closing the loop. There's been a few times over the last 10 years that I've been doing this type of work. You know, at a meeting, someone would pull me aside and say, hey, I was at the last meeting. I really appreciate you came back and you answered a question. You know, it goes so far in building trust, you know, and that's, so I appreciate the comment, and I just wanted to second it.
And I'd add to that, you know, it's important to communicate how you use their input. In order to do that, you have to actually use their input. And, you know, we've probably all seen the public engagement processes where it's somebody checking a box, right? They're just getting input for the sake of getting input and to say that they could do it. And it's really, really important that we're really allowing the residents to decide what direction we go.
Let's see, I don't see any other questions. Is there anybody else in the audience who'd like to ask a question? It looks like Betsy wrote, in what ways would you suggest responding when planning commissioners post comments on Facebook to openly criticize council members and mayor? That sounds like a very loaded question, so I'll let some of you handle that.
I'll take a bit of a swing at this one, and I know that there's a lot of other people out there that have some really good ideas as well. One of the things that I think is always that challenging piece is the social media, what's private social media and what is public, and I think speaking from some background where the city got way behind on the education communication piece. Just because things go viral on social media, and sometimes that happens. I think one of the things that you have to carefully look at is, how can I counter that with an education component of, here's the issue, and let me explain this to you in the best way possible, and be neutral. It's not, this is a person who has a criticism, yes, but as an organization, we have to kind of take the broader perspective and say, you know, that person is certainly allowed, even as a planning commissioner, to have their opinion, but here's some of the other elements that you might want to consider. And it's not easy, because you don't want to get into this Facebook, you know, back and forth, which typically doesn't normally end well. But you do want to make sure that your website, that your communications, your official city communications are really incorporating some of these education pieces, because If you have a planning commissioner who is criticizing it, maybe there's a disconnect. Maybe if you can continue to engage that commissioner and say, you know, hey, I didn't know if you knew this, but, and again, one of the things that I think is really critical in addition to the follow through is the repetitiveness of it. Not, that sounds like negative, but you really want to make sure that you're continuing the dialogue and not a one and done, because this is a continuing ongoing thing. It's usually pretty emotional for people as a whole, and you want to make sure that you continue to get that information out to the best of your ability. Thank you, Betsy, by the way. I thank you. Thanks for thanking me.
All right, well, I don't see any more questions. Panelists, do you have any final closing remarks or anything you'd like to add in the last couple minutes here?
Go ahead, Ari.
The three of us unmute at the same time. I guess I'll go first. You know, we are in a state that is growing rapidly. In fact, for the last 10 years, we've been the fastest growing state in the country. And I think in all of our conversations and public outreach, it's important to keep that front and center. That it's just a reality. We grow rapidly. It's because we're a great place to live and we have a strong economy. And you know, the only way to not grow is to be a terrible place to live and have a terrible economy. And I'm not willing to go there. And the more we keep that reality in front of us, I think the better our growth conversations can be. So rather than it being about should we grow or not, it should be about how should we grow. And then our conversations become just much more constructive and more productive.
I wholeheartedly agree with what Ari just said. And I wanted to just add one thing that I think we also want to take consideration of, and that is our sheer ability to collaborate effectively. I know that this is not a perfect system within the state of Utah in terms of the collaboration element, but overall, there are a lot of other states and organizations that wish that they had a level of collaboration. And I think that one of the things that we can really take to heart and to value is that we can have this connective pieces, we can have these educations, we can have disagreements, we can have all of the above, because we know we want to try to create the best communities for our children and our grandchildren, et cetera. And so what we can do to collaborate will go a long way.
I think I would just second what Ari and Beth said. You know, I don't need to summarize what they said, but yeah, to maintain our quality of life, this is important work. It's tiring work, and just kudos to all of the audience here for tuning in. I know this is tough and tiring work. Keep up the good work.
I will make a final plug. I think, especially in light of the growth comments, our population is also changing. It's new and different. And so staying on top of the public engagement best practices and really finding new ways to engage with different audiences is important. So if there is anything that you have feedback on related to the guidebook, we think this is such an important resource for ourselves and for our communities. Because public engagement is really critical to the success of our programs, our city plans and visions. So please don't hesitate to contact us if you have feedback and ideas about how to improve this guidebook.
Did you have anything you'd like to add, Michaela?
I'm good. I think they said it all.
Sounds good. All right. Well, again, thank you all. Thank you to all of our attendees for sticking with us through 2.5 days now of Zoom meetings. I know it's tiring, but we really appreciate your time and hope to see you again in person in the not too distant future. So thank you again. Thank you to all our panelists. You've all been terrific. And we will post any PowerPoints we receive and the video recordings on our website. All attendees will have access to them. So if you missed any you'd like to see, you can go back and watch them, or if you want to come back and review any of this information, we'll have it available to you. We look forward to continuing to partner with all of our excellent planning organizations around the state, and hopefully we'll be able to help share the guidebook when it's available and make sure that all of our municipalities see it. So if you have any questions in the future, please feel free to reach out, and thank you again, everybody, for your time.